So when we've carefully considered the what, the who, the where, right? Inherent in all of this is then a step which I consider to be something very key and that needs to kind of be ongoing, as does everything else, right? Is the obstacle analysis. So when I say this, I don't mean writing that little table of assumptions and risks, right? You can write that in the paper if that's the format, but I really recommend in the design, it's critical, is to do a thorough, a very in-depth obstacle analysis, right? And you have two sections, the external obstacles and the internal obstacles, right? So it is a little bit of what I said about the where, right? Topography, but you must separate them because sometimes we forget about the internal obstacles that we have and that end up causing delays or causing problems or a lot of other things. But let's start with the external obstacles, right? So we're talking about potential obstacles as well as the ones that you can already see, no? Things that might arise, no? Because we want to be able to anticipate things, right? And for that, sometimes the past is a good predictor, yeah? Even if we haven't been operating, others might have been, and we can get a sense of the past from others, right? So when we think about these external potential obstacles or real obstacles, no, we're talking about things like, as we mentioned before, topography, you know, what's the lay of the land, literally, from an access point of view, climate, what climatic considerations do I need to take into account? What about institutions and the state and the law? What about armed groups? What's going to basically make it more difficult to implement, right? That's what you're looking for and thinking about, yeah? That they're already there or that might emerge, okay? And you need to kind of have a very broad vision about this, okay? Because these are things we're going to resolve in the design, not as we implement, yeah? Because that's exhausting, really. That's what we call putting out fires. So being an optimistic designer in humanitarian work, it's not going to be the best way, unfortunately, yeah? This is a good place for pessimistic designers who can see problems before they even happen, right? So how do we do this? We do this by imagination, right? By thought experiments, by thinking, what if? Because we're trying to get to the worst possible scenario, right? Because the worst possible scenario, if I resolve it in my design, that's much better, right? Yeah, anticipated resolution, if you want. But I have to be able to think about it. Okay, what might happen? What could happen? Yeah, what has happened in the past? Might it happen again? All of those things we need to analyze. And not just have a little think about it in the morning. No, do a thorough analysis and involve as many people in it as possible. And of course, involve others, right? This isn't something to be doing in your office just by yourself or with a couple, with your boss or a few other people. You really need to engage, again, deep into the communities to figure out what are the potential problems that you might have in implementing. That's what the obstacles are. The problems that I might have coming from the environment, and that will make my implementation more difficult or block it completely, for example. Yeah. So I need to be able to know that so I can solve it in advance. Then, when it comes to internal, which is the part we rarely analyze, except in some fictitious SWOT exercises that sometimes we do, we need to be analyzing internal capacity, right? And look at possible potential problems with my own organization that are going to get in the way of my implementation or delay it or whatever. And these things can be anything from, okay, big picture, what is the moment, or what is my organization, what is happening in my organization, right? Is my organization well resourced? Has my organization got funding difficulties? Is my organization focused on a much bigger emergency somewhere else? You must think of all of those things, right? What is the level of support that is being given? What is the level of priority that's being given? And then when you break this down in terms of if you're in a country and you're in the fields location, and there are other projects or other field locations that, for example, somebody in capital or is managing, what is the capacity in capital, in the capital coordination team or the capital support team? How many balls do they have in the air? How many other project locations or field locations or programs are they supporting? And what is the priority, right? You need to know that as well. What is your kind of status in the priorital hierarchy? Because maybe your program or your project is not the priority in the country. And then within the project itself, if yours isn't the only intervention, you need to see as well, okay, how many other interventions are running at the same time, and what is the prioritization. So if somebody's running a more critical intervention, right, and yours is less critical, then you need to understand that as well, because maybe you will be deprioritized in terms of logistic or administrative support. So you need to also imagine this as a potential blocker or problem or something that will slow you down, if not delay you. Then there's, of course, the very key issue of supply chain. Yeah, to ascertain to what degree your program is dependent on supply chain. Some interventions are very supply chain heavy, others are less so. If you're dependent on international orders, that might have, particularly in the context of today, where there's a lot of problems in supply chain, there's a lot of shortages in production, manufacturing, etc. Are they going to hit you? Are there going to be delays? Are you going to be blocked by that? What's the situation with staffing? What's the availability of skills locally? Am I going to have to bring them from other places? What is my reliance on international staff? Is there high turnover? What is my likelihood of being delayed? All of those things you need to consider, right? And in a very methodical way, not just thinking, oh God, the gaps, oh God, the gaps. So then when you've kind of analysed all the potential things that could go wrong, and that's how you should frame it, what could go wrong, right? Doesn't mean that it will, but in your design then you incorporate the solutions, okay, with like, what if, right? What if I don't get this equipment for 2 months after the project starts, right? So if you do what ifs, then you can do, then if X happens, then Y is what we'll do, right? That's how you build resolution capacity into your design, right? So you're imagining a potential problem and you're imagining or designing the solution, right? Sometimes there's not a solution, so you need plan Bs, or contingency planning, right? So what are you going to do if you don't get the things you need, right? What are you going to do? You're not going to just sit around. You need to design a plan B, design contingencies, design solutions, right? And preempt. If you know in advance, right, you can, if you think, for example, there's no point, for example, designing a very heavy intervention that requires a lot of staff if you know that staff is not available. It's just like wishful thinking design. It's not intelligent design, right? The design has to be grounded in reality, not in fantasy, right? So you really need to analyze all those things and build in solutions where you can, mitigation where you can, and plan Bs always. Always imagining the worst, right? What if, and if that happens, then this is what we'll do, right? And then that saves a lot of firefighting later on and frustration, because you've already incorporated it into the design. And then, of course, there will be things that you won't have anticipated or things you can't solve. But by having done this analysis and taking it as part of your design, not something separate that you do on the little paper, assumptions and risks, but building it into your design, it will be much better in your implementation. You will have a much better life. And more importantly, you will build your design for better impact by resolving the problems and not be trying to resolve them as you implement. An important thing here that I advise is in these steps is don't do your resourcing or your budget until the very last thing, right? Because too often what happens is there's the initial design, then there's all the budget, and then people start cutting, right? So get your design as good as it can get first, then resource it, right? Because if not, you won't be able to show if there's cuts, right? Because sometimes what's cut is the resources, but not the ambition. You won't be able to show that. So it's good to have your optimal design, let's call it prototype 1, right? The first iteration of your design ready before you start to resource it. Okay, and if that has to go up a donor chain or a cluster chain or a hierarchical chain, let it go up first without the budget attached. Because if not, people will look at the budget rather than the design. Okay? And if you've gone through all these steps well, your analysis will be very good. Your argumentation will be very good because you will have gone through in depth the what, the why, the who, the where, and this obstacle analysis before people start talking about money. So it's always better to design for impact, not for budgets.